So basically, it takes four things for a startup to scale. First, it needs a good product. It needs a revenue model. It needs enough capital. And it needs an organization that can scale. But frankly, the reality is that most of the founders do focus most of their time on the first three. Early stage, they're going to be trying to figure out how to build their product, focusing on understanding what are the pain points of their clients and building a product that addresses that. So that's really, first stage. Then, next stage, around Series B usually, most of that time is going to be spent on, building, making sure that they can, bring money, that they have a revenue models that work, and getting also enough capital to pay the bills, and also to be able to move to the next stage. But frankly, very little of the founders do spend time thinking, let alone building an organization that can scale for the next levels. And so as a result, increasingly, the organization is going to lag behind the business needs, which is actually fine as long as the growth is, at reasonable scale. But from the moment you're reaching Series C, the gap is getting really critical because everything is happening at once. And that kind of looks like that. So you need to hire a lot of people. Basically, you received a quite decent amount of money. Series B, let's say that it's usually around 20 to 50 million US dollars, which is going to be mostly spent on scaling, which means people. So you're going to hire a lot of people. And so in order to hire all these people fast, you need to have a recruiting team. You need to have an ability to attract the right talents. You need to have the right HR operations to be able to sustain all these new people in your operations. So which means, you want to have people to be paid on time. You do want to have people being onboarded properly, etc. You do need to have managers to be able to manage and welcome your people, to provide some clarity in terms of what their roles are, etc. You do need to rethink your reporting structure. You now have new offices in different locations, possibly in different countries. Do you still report functionally, or are you going to report regionally? And you also need to be rethinking the roles of your founders. The founders in early stage were multi-hatting. And as you're hiring more people, you're also hiring more senior people who are taking some of the hats of the founders. So what is their role now? So there's a lot of things that is happening all at once, and that starts to be really chaotic at some point when you realize that all this needs to be done, but you have not prepared for it, and you have nobody to actually make it happen. So that goes to my the first thing that I see that founders tend to overlook as they grow. It's really to take the time to build the right organization, the organization that will be able to scale over time. And in order to do that, you need to plan. And the best way to do it is to build a roadmap. Exactly the same way that you do for your product, you build a roadmap for your organization. You think about what are all the things that needs to be happening, in which order does that need to be happening, what's the sequencing, etc. So this is just an example, but most probably, before you have your first wave of huge hires, you may want to hire HR and recruiting capability so that you can get ready for that and then build the rest and not being late on doing all that. So that's the first thing. The second thing that I have realized as I've been working with founders is they tend to also overlook on building the company culture, culture that really is strong. Why is company culture important? Well, that's almost a subject in itself, so I won't dig too long into it. But basically, the company culture for a startup, that's true for every company, but especially true for a startup, That's what helps you attract and retain your talents. Anybody can pay more than you. And that's true for even MNCs, but definitely true for startups. They can potentially copy your business model. They can copy your technology. There is one thing that your competitors and other companies cannot copy. It's your culture, who you are, your identity. And that's what you can differentiate. And that's also what makes people want to be working with you. They feel that they belong to something bigger, and they feel that they relate to the values. So one thing that is super important as you build your company culture is to realize that actually 80% of the culture comes from the CEO or the co-founding team. Realizing this is extremely important. If as a CEO you're competitive, most probably your organization is going to operate in a slightly aggressive and competitive way. If you are analytical, most of the decisions are most probably going to be taken from a data-driven perspective. If the CEO is a designer, most probably the product is going to be designed from a design perspective, etc., etc. But realizing this from a founding perspective, from the founders, is very critical. I'm seeing too many founders building their culture and delisting the values of their company from an aspirational point of view. So this is what we should be. If you list what you should be and put it on the walls or whatsoever, but if this is what your culture, you're defining your culture, that's not going to work. Because you're lying to yourself, you're lying to your candidates, you're lying to your employees. So if you are always late to meetings, make sure punctuality is not in your list of values, because it will make people laugh and people won't believe you anymore. So that's the first thing. The second thing about culture is, of course, there is an implicit culture that happens. But too little founders are actually spending time, investing time in making it explicit, in distilling it in actual words, actual behaviors, and making sure that it's clear to everyone. So it's not about having the list and putting it on the walls. That's not going to be enough. What's going to work is to ensure first that you're consistent in the way that you are. So if you have said that one of your values is to empower people, make sure that your HR policies, for instance, do go in that way too. Don't start to have very strict working hours or leave policies that are very strict as well. That's not in sync. So that's being explicit. So that's about the company culture. The third thing that I've seen founders overlooking is planning hiring. Why is it important to plan hiring? It's because hiring does take time. It's really long to find the right person. And the second thing is that your organization is growing at super scale. When you reach that Series B, C, it just goes super fast. So especially for your senior hires, if you hire for today, the chance is that when you have your hire, 1 year from now, they will already be underqualified for the size of their role. If you are 50 people today and you hire, a CTO that can run an organization of 50 people, well, in 1 year, you're going to be probably 150 or 200, and then 500. They're already underqualified for that. And you're not going to change your VPs or your C-levels every year. It just doesn't make sense. So you need to be planning as much as possible. Now, there is always the dilemma around, do we hire fast or do we hire slow? Well, in the startup world, a lot of people will say, well, you need to go fast, right? We have no time to figure this out, so let's go fast, fast, fast. which does totally make sense. I mean, we can build a case for hiring fast in the very early stage. It makes sense. We're still figuring out what we're doing. We're still figuring out what the roles really mean and what type of people we need to do those roles, etc. So it kind of makes sense. However, from the moment you have a hire fast culture, you need to also have a fire fast culture. And that's the hardest piece. I've seen a lot of founders, okay with the hire fast. When the fire fast needs to be happening, it's a little bit more complicated. But if you do not combine the fire fast with the fire fast with the hire fast, well, then it means that you're starting to have a backlog of potentially underqualified people who are not really suited for organization and that are going to slow you down. And also it's not giving the right message to the rest of the employees, the ones who are performing or even overperforming. So as you grow, when you get to, again, Series B, Series C, you just can't afford that. You can't be hiring fast and then we'll figure it out later. Because at that time, you really do need to hire really senior people. You need to hire the people that will be with you for the next phase, which is probably 2 to 5 years. And you do need to have those, really the right ones. So do take the time for after that. And concerning hiring, the last thing is a lot of founders tend to think a bit too late that they need to build their hiring capability. But the second thing is they tend to think that hiring an HR, a general HR person, will fit the bill. But the thing is, first, an HR and a recruiter role are totally different type of profiles. A good HR person is somebody that runs good operations in administration, etc. A good recruiter is a salesperson. It's somebody that will love networking, that will love going out there and reaching out to people, selling them the job, etc. And will do good account manager with the hiring manager. So that's the first thing. The second is that by the time you need to hire 50 people or more in the year, hire a full-time recruiter. It's a no-brainer because the ROI is clear. If you need to use an agency for 50 roles, that's not working well. The second thing is it's much more efficient. You have somebody that knows you. It's for a brand perspective, it's much better as well. So really, do make sure that you hire a recruiter soon enough and that you do not mix HR and recruiting. And the last thing that tends to be overlooked by founders, as they get into the hypergrowth, is to growing the executive team itself. So if you have a look at what founders do at the beginning of their startup story, they mainly do the stuff themselves. They get the shit done. Why that? First, because there aren't enough people to do all of it, so they need to be multi-hatting. The second thing is they actually like it. They like being in control, seeing what happens, making decisions. And the staff likes it as well, because there is proximity with the leadership team, and that's pretty good. And, well, it's kind of comfortable. They don't have to make decisions, so that's good. But as you scale, that's not going to work anymore. The leadership team is becoming the bottleneck of the organization. If everybody has to wait for the leader, for the CEO or the CEO or whoever, to make a move, then you're not going fast enough. You're starting to slow down. So it's not a model that works, and it needs to be changed. And you need to move from a doer to a leader. And your role becomes not to get shit done, but to build an organization that will get shit done. It's a totally different role. It has nothing to do. And so a lot of founders are struggling a bit with that for two reasons. One, because they actually find it hard to let go. They actually like the idea of it being in control. And second, in order to be able to let go, you need to have people that you trust to be running this autonomously and making the right decision for the business. And which means that you need to hire senior leaders in your executive team to be taking these roles. The other thing that the founders need to move from is generalists. And especially in this region, a lot of the startups are young founders who have been going to university, have usually great universities, whether it's in here or in the US, very smart, really willing to learn, so usually they read a lot and they really want to know about leadership, etc. But they're generalists, right? Usually they have between 0 to 4 years experience and obviously no leadership experience. And so what happens is they're usually generalists, and that can work at the beginning, but as the organization grows, as the number of headcounts goes up, and as the business is getting more and more complex, you need to bring in some expertise, whether that's industry expertise or functional expertise. Because as that's where they reach the limit of their experience. But it's really complicated because most of the time you tend to hire people like you. So most of these founders do hire junior generalists to take on the senior roles. And the second reason is most of the time those roles in the leadership team are taken by the early team, who are themselves young and generalists. And replacing them by experts is a bit challenging, because it means that as a CEO you need to make a difficult decision and potentially moving down one of your person or letting them go. Which is the last piece that we're seeing. So Fred Wilson, who is an American entrepreneur and investor, says that you have to turn the team 3 times before you move from a startup to a grown-up company. Which means that by the time, so you probably, the team that is starting the company is going to be different to the team that will be at 1,000 to the team that will be at 5,000 and more. The person that developed the product is probably not going to be the VP of engineering at 1,000, which is probably not going to be the one at 5,000. The person that sold the first, signed the first deal is probably not going to be the VP of sales at 1,000, etc. But that's super complicated. And few of the CEO do see that, and that becomes even more complicated when these roles are actually taken by co-founders. And so it's very difficult to have those conversations and to make the move. And so what we're seeing often is either the founders are delaying, hoping that it will solve by itself somehow, or that the co-founder or the executive will realize that they're not suited anymore. Frankly, that rarely happens. Or they hire somebody else to be, co-leading the department. So they hire somebody more senior with more expertise to be heading the department with them. But then you end up having 2 people doing one role. So it's costly. And the second thing, it's adding an ambiguity for the team. So the team doesn't really know who's in charge anymore. And that's kind of the same when, you have the kids and they have the choice to go to mommy or daddy to ask for sweets. Most of the time, they're going to go to the parent that will say yes. And that's the same in the organization. From the moment you have 2 heads, then the people start to go to the one that will answer yes to their questions and asks. So turning a team, realizing that you need to turn the team early is super important. So this is it for me today. So just to recap on the 4 things that are critical for founders to think about as they scale. making sure that they think about building a scalable organization soon enough, thinking about really investing time in building a culture that will be make sense for the organization. Planning hiring, really think ahead when you're hiring, and growing the executive team and thinking ahead on that as well. If you're interested in this subject, so that's for me, but if you're interested in the subject, I brought a copy here, but I really encourage you this reading. It's called Beyond the Age of Innocence, Can Southeast Asian Startups Build World-Class Organizations? It's a report that we published last year. We interviewed 30 CEOs of growing startups in the region and also few VCs. And basically, we identified most of the challenges that they have gone through as they grew the organization. And so you can have a copy of the report here. I have only one hard copy. So if you're interested in the soft copy, that's here. And you have much more. So I could only speak about 4 today, but you have, it's a pretty interesting read. So this is it for me. So how many employees do we need to have until we hire a dedicated HR? A dedicated HR, I would say it depends on the complexity of your organization. It depends how fast you're going to grow. But the minimum for me is, the maximum that you should go is 50. From the moment you have 50 employees, it's absolutely critical. I've seen an organization at 100, they still had no HR. It was getting a total mess. First, because, as I said, the leadership it was fine. You don't need HR when you have the proximity with the leadership team. From the moment you don't have that anymore, you do need HR to be able to coordinate all that. So 50 is my number. How do you know that the person you're about to hire is the right one? So there are a few things that you need to think about when you hire somebody. First, you need to be extremely clear about the role that you're hiring. So even before thinking about a person, you need to know what is the scope of the role, what is this person going to be doing on a daily basis, what is the accountability, etc. So this needs to be clear. Again, early stage is complicated because we don't really know about it, but it's better to know, because otherwise you're going to set the wrong expectations for the hire. And when you interview people, you need to check for the culture fit. That's something that is often being dismissed. And you need to check the technical fit. So for both of them, I recommend what we call behavioral questions. We tend in interview to be going through the experience and tell me what you did. And if they have 3 interviews, they're going to have 3 people asking the same questions, tell me what you did. Well, if you want to really know and test the person, ask them behavioral questions on specific points. A behavioral question is a question that starts either by, can you tell me about a time when you were in that situation? How did you do? What happened? And then you really project them in a situation that you want to test and see how they behave. So that's the first. The second is, imagine that you are in this situation. What would you do? And so there's usually no right and wrong answer, but you can see the thought process and the way people, would do, really. And does that fit with you? And so, okay. Thank you very much.